Get ready for unfiltered and unapologetic culture, entertainment, relationships, and a little bit of politics on Motor City Woman Radio. Follow Rocky. Okay, so yeah, you see, as you can see, we are starting out on the black foot tonight. Welcome to Rockets Reality, and welcome to the first official historian of the city of Detroit, Jamon Jordan. Did I say that correctly,
You did.
Jamon?
You did. Thank you. Thank you
Okay,
for having
welcome,
me.
welcome to you. Thank you for we finally got it. I finally got him, y'all. I'm gonna tell y'all a story how I was stalking him. Like, is you going come on, Jabbar. I'm trying. And my thing is, I know he was supposed to like, look, don't be trying to give me no tours, do no tours for free. But I'm like, I hope he don't charge for the to come on the podcast. So thank you. I appreciate you for being here.
Glad to
So
be here.
welcome, fellow Detroiter, Baba Jaman, as people call you,
Mm-hmm.
historian, educator, just an HP.
HP. That's right.
HP, yeah,
That's
that's
right.
what I had to ask. I said, "Is he from Detroit?" And Joe, engineer, had to alert me. He was like, "No, he from HP." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I was like,
H-
"Okay." Right. So give him a clap for that. So welcome, Jamon. And just first off, just want to commend you for all the work that you do. Give you your flowers. I'm one of those people who believe in telling people how they feel about them and how they,
mm-hmm.
well, I don't feel any way about you,
I
but
understand what you're saying. Yes, yes, I hear you.
but I do appreciate what you do because you're definitely one of the people who got your boots to the ground for the city of Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love how you represent for our city and how you just represent just for Black history,
Mm-hmm.
period, and show that we are just a remarkable people.
That's right.
So
That's right.
you're 52. Is that okay for
That is
me
right.
letting out?
Yep. You
Is that
can.
okay? It
Yeah.
would have been
It's
too
not.
late if
It's
I.
not a secret. It's not a secret.
It would have been too late if I let it out.
Right. Right.
But he's a native Detroiter or Highland Parker,
Yep.
married with
That's
children,
right.
ranging from all ages and stages,
Mm-hmm.
educator in the DPS system for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Bless you. Now the first historian, official historian of the city of Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
and also a professor or lecturer
Yes.
at the university, not the, but University of Michigan, my alma mater, y'all.
All right. All right.
So, so of course, when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, I got to get him on the show." I was
Oh
telling my
wow.
husband, like, "Oh, well, he teach at Michigan. I gotta get him on the show." But I just love have I've followed you for a while, for about 3 to 5 years now, and
Mm-hmm.
I just really love. I don't want to say I'm a history buff, but I am intrigued about what
Mm-hmm.
history reveals about us
Oh yeah.
and how it really it really just like is a blueprint for our legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how it's so many just unknown facts about us as Black people and about just Detroit. And
Mm-hmm.
I say it with my chest when I go out of town. People be
Mm-hmm.
like, "Where you from?" I'm like, "From Detroit." And no, people,
That's right.
there's a negative connotation.
That's
Like,
right.
shout out to Jamil Hill, how she just was saying how she always feels like, it's like this chip on our
That's
shoulder
right.
of being from Detroit because it's been such a negative stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love how people like her and people like you, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, people like me, how we show that there's so many gems in Detroit.
That's right.
So I just want to thank you for what you're doing. And tell us, how did you get into it? Like, let's go back to Lil Jamon,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with the Kool-Aid, the cherry Kool-Aid, running up
Sure.
the block.
All right.
Talk about how did you get into being a history buff or an educator?
All right. So I grew up at the border between Detroit and Highland Park. My house was on the Detroit side, but I attended both school districts. So I attended both Detroit public schools and Highland Park public schools. And the great thing about growing up at that time period is the majority of my teachers were African American. So in elementary school today, there are some of our students may not experience an African American teacher in elementary school because
Mm,
overwhelmingly, um, in the predominantly African American schools in elementary schools, white women are the majority of the
mhm,
teachers. They
mhm.
may have an African American woman teacher, but they probably won't come in contact in elementary school with an African American male teacher.
Yep.
They might have a principal who's an African American male. They may have or gym. They may have a gym teacher, but none of the
Right.
the regular classes. But I grew up with that, so we had African American men teacher, African American women teachers, and we also had some white teachers. So I grew up in an environment with teachers who were dedicated to instilling some level of pride in the students, and sometimes that pride was about being black.
Yeah.
So I grew up in that. So that's part of why it started out really early. Again, I attended both schools. So I attended Halley from it was Halley Elementary, or Halley. It was really K through 8 when I first got there in kindergarten. And I attended that school from K through second grade, and then it switched to a middle school. It became a middle school. That's when I switched over to Highland Park schools because again, I
Was
lived on
it
the
Hallie
border.
Magnet Middle? I remember when
So
they did the
yeah,
whole
so they
magnet
switched it
thing,
over to a
right?
magnet school. So what I was
Mhm.
there pre-magnet.
Okay,
Yeah, so
okay.
I was there pre-magnet, and then I went to Liberty, and now I'm in Highland Park. And I kind of switched off. I would go to a Highland Park school, then a Detroit public school, but I graduated from Highland Park High School,
Okay,
Highland
he
Park Community High
represent.
School, class of '89.
He like making
All
that
right,
clear.
so
Right quick, Jamon, did you get to share the Rockies reality video?
I
Oh,
think I did.
on your
Yeah, I
let's
could.
just double check because we want
Let's.
to make sure
Yep,
everyone
I
is
want to be
tapping
everybody to
in.
be able to see it.
Going to the
So nope, that's
yep,
not
let's
it.
okay, so go back.
Let
Yep.
me go. Let's see.
Yeah, we just just right quick,
Okay, here we
y'all.
are.
Yep.
Yep. We want to make sure that everybody, if you go on my page, you'll be able to
Yeah.
watch it and comment.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I'm sharing it
Gotcha.
now on
Awesome.
my page.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome,
Yep.
awesome. So, yeah, so
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 oh yeah,
let
go
me let
ahead.
me finish. So by the time I got to high school, hip hop is a major thing going on. Now, I always loved reading, and again, the teachers were instilling um, Black history, Black pride into us, and then this hip hop thing kind of blew up, and I was a rap fan from Sugar Hill Gang,
Love it.
so
I love it.
since 1970, since to the hip to the hop, so and when it went through the phase of Black consciousness rap. So when we
The
get to the
90s.
yeah, we
The
get
golden era,
the
by the
late the,
way.
the late 80s, really.
Right.
When we get to
Yeah.
Public Enemy,
Right.
their particularly their second album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, that came out in '88.
Right.
And then you get KRS-One and Boogie Down Productions, their albums, which run from '86 and through the '90s. But
Yeah,
really,
you're right.
that beginning period of that Black consciousness era in hip hop is in the late
You're
'80s,
right. Yep,
and it
you're right.
continues though
Yeah.
through the '90s. But it starts in the late '80s. Once we get to that period, now
With main
we
source
got
and all of that.
yeah, you
Yeah.
got now you got this hip hop doing what some of my teachers were doing, trying to instill this Black history and this Black pride. And this is, of course, a music genre that I love. And so I began listening to the lyrics, writing the lyrics down, learning, going to the library, reading about some of the people that these rappers are talking about in their rap songs, people like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm
Mhm.
X and the Black Panther Party. So I'm reading about this. And so I'm studying, I'm writing papers for my class. And so when I graduate, I go to college and I triple majored at Western Michigan University in Black Studies.
Oh,
Um,
the Go Broncos. Okay, my
yep, go
sister. Okay,
Broncos.
my sister's an
Black
alum.
Black Studies, American Studies, and Sociology. So I triple majored. When I graduated, I came back to the city of Detroit. I was a social studies teacher. So first I was a teaching assistant, a substitute teacher.
Mhm.
I taught K through 12, but eventually I was a middle school social studies teacher for about 10 years. So all in all, I taught about 20 years in the classroom. 10 of those years were middle school social studies.
Okay.
And it would be there that I would try to do what teachers had done for me
Right.
growing up. They had instilled that Black pride, that Black history, that groundedness in my own people and culture. And so I tried to do the same for my students. And what was missing when, as a teacher, at first was Black history. It just wasn't a major part of the curriculum of schools
Mhm.
when I got out of college and came back to the city of Detroit to be a teacher in 1999. When I got back to the city of Detroit to teach in 1999, Black history was not a major part of the curriculum. Of
Not at all.
course, Martin Luther
Unless
King,
your teacher
right?
incorporated it.
Yeah, yeah,
Unless your teacher oh, I'm sorry,
right.
hold
Yeah,
on, Jamal, just right quick.
yep.
I need you to go to your Facebook page and
Okay,
share because you're sharing it from the YouTube. I'm sorry,
okay,
I just want to
yeah.
make sure we get the most.
All right,
So go
let's
to Rocky's
Rocky's
Reality. Yep,
reality.
on the Facebook page.
Oops, Rocky's reality on
Yep, and
Facebook. Oh
then
yeah, there
yep,
it
share
is.
that. Yep,
Yep,
share that video. Yep.
there we go.
Yep, there
Okay,
we
I
go.
got it.
Yep. And so
So
yeah, unless it because I noticed with the teachers they would have to do their
And so
own
that's what I
thing. It
had to
wasn't
do.
part of the
It wasn't
curriculum.
part of
It
the
wasn't
curriculum.
in the
No, no.
Harper and the Hill
It wasn't
Roman
in the
books.
textbook. It
It
wasn't
wasn't
in
in
the
McGraw Hill. It wasn't in there.
and it wasn't in the
Yeah.
state
Yeah.
in the state standards
Yep.
either. So what I had to do is what your teachers and what I guess my teachers had probably done decades before was I had to incorporate it myself.
Yep.
And so that's what I did. As time went on, the schools I was teaching at they got much better about that. And eventually I started teaching at Roma Institute Public School Academy, which is an African centered charter school. So Black history was no problem
In
there.
Roma.
Roma Institute.
Okay.
Yep, Roma Institute Public School Academy. I taught there for 10 years. Black history is the whole school is grounded in Black
Is that like
history and culture.
Nataki Taliba, one of those
So
type
it was
schools?
an
Mark,
yeah, it was one of the
okay.
African centered charter schools in the city of
Okay. A
Detroit. It started
Shule.
out as a African centered independent school, or what people would call a private school, so tuition based, but eventually
Mm.
became a charter school like Aisha Shule. In fact, it's a child of Aisha Shule.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
teachers and parents who founded Roma came out of Aisha Shule. All
Great.
right. And
Great.
so, but by the time I got there, that had already happened. And so I'm teaching there. And so, of course, there's no problem with Black history there. I'm in my element. This
Right.
is where that stuff is being taught. But as I began to teach for years, what I began to see in that school, but in most schools, Detroit's Black history was not a major factor.
Mm.
And my students live in the city of Detroit. So it's important for them to know about the Montgomery bus boycott. It's important for them to know about the marches in Selma for voting rights. It's important for them to
Right.
know about the Black Panther Party starting in Oakland, California. Malcolm X being the minister at Temple Number 7 in Harlem, New York. It's important for them to know Harriet Tubman leading the Underground Railroad on the East Coast. It's important for them to know all of those aspects of Black history. But Detroit is a part of all of that history. Detroit is a part of the civil rights movement. So you don't just got to learn about Montgomery and Selma. You got to know about what civil rights activism was going on in the
Right,
city of
because we
Detroit.
have a stop on the Underground Railroad
If you
in
want to talk
Greektown.
about
I
the
didn't even
Underground
know that
Railroad,
until I took a field
that's
trip
right. If you want to know
as a
about the
high
Underground
schooler. Right.
Railroad, yes, Harriet Tubman, we got to know about her, but we got to know about the people in the city of Detroit who were part of the
Yep.
Underground Railroad.
Yep.
So I began
Yeah.
taking my students on field trips to these historic sites. And as they went on these field trips to these historic sites, they were learning about their own community and how their own community had some of the history they were learning about in the textbooks. As parents were on these field trips as chaperones, they were learning. And
Mhm.
sometimes they would say, "Hey, I've been living in this neighborhood my whole life. I never knew that was there."
Yeah.
And so they were learning about their own neighborhoods. And as other people, as those parents and children began to talk to people, there was a demand for other folks to learn this history too. That's how I started Black Scroll Network History and Tours back in
I
2013.
love it because I was
So,
about to lead
yep.
into. I was about to lead into.
Mhm.
I love when guests do that. Y'all go
Yep.
to the right to the next little
Right. So
bullet
that's
point I'm about to go to.
yeah.
Because congrats on that 10
Yes,
years,
10
10
years.
years.
Yeah, it'll be 10
So
years in
so
July.
so that just was born from a need because I'm sure the parents was like, hold on now.
That's right. When I first started, the reality of it is, I think I started, it was free or dang near free. I just wanted the parents and folks to know this history, and whatever
Hmm.
they donated was good. It wasn't originally like a real true business. It was me leading some folks to learn some of this Detroit history. And if they gave me a donation, then that was great. Eventually, it evolved from that to an actual business with people being able to book and reserve tours for their groups, people to join my public tours. You could sign up, Facebook page and Eventbrite and all. So it became a full fledged business, and I had been doing that for years, uh, and people began to seek me out, and of course,
Is that how it led to you start doing the
right,
documentaries? And
right,
so let me back up just a little
yeah,
bit.
yep, yep,
When you first started the tours, how did you decide where to take people? Because it's vast. I mean, Detroit has such a
right,
layered history. Like,
yeah,
how did you decide? Okay, I'm gonna go here. People should. Is there even a starting point where people can start at? You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Can it be? You
I
know.
started at the beginning. So I started where Black folks in Detroit began because my tours were focused on Black history.
Okay.
So of course, if you're talking about Black history in city of Detroit, you're covering a bunch of other history too. So it's
Right.
not like you're going to not talk about Henry Ford. And you're not going to talk about the auto industry. You're not going to talk about Greek town. You're not going to. So
Or
you're
the
going to.
riot.
Yeah, you're going.
I
So you're going to
mean,
talk about all
all
this
that.
other history, not
Right.
just Black history. But my focus was Black history. So I started where Black history started. Black history started in the city of Detroit, in the Lower East Side area of the city of Detroit. particularly in the areas where Africans who were enslaved in the city of Detroit were living. So you got to understand Detroit had slavery. That's the first thing. Where were they living when they were enslaved? In the city of Detroit. So we started there.
So
And
there were slaves in the North,
that's right.
and that was because that's something I learned when I was in
That's
school.
right.
By the way, I was my double major was Afro American and African
Oh,
Studies,
good,
and
good.
I learned there was a Northern
Yes.
form of slavery as
That's
well.
right.
People
That's
thought automatically since you were in the North you were free, but
no,
that was not
no,
true.
that definitely was not
So
true.
okay,
Yeah.
so go back. Yep,
So we
it was from originals who were
Yep,
enslaved in
African
Detroit.
folks who were enslaved. And of course, if you got slavery, you got the resistance to slavery. You got people fighting. And of course, out of that will evolve what we know as the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad is a portion of the fight against slavery, what we know as the abolitionist movement. So my tour started in the areas where Black folks started, the Lower East Side areas that we know now today as Lafayette Park, Greektown, Elmwood Park, and of course, just the downtown area of the city of Detroit. So just
Hmm.
downtown Detroit. And of course, the riverfront has the Gateway to Freedom International Underground Railroad
Right.
Monument. So that's where my tour started. These were walking tours originally. So
Okay.
my tours, I didn't have buses and vans and none of that. I was just doing walking tours. We meet at Campus Marshes and we start walking to these historic sites. I still do walking tours, but I also do bus tours and van tours and all of that now. But originally, it was walking tours. And so we focused first on the Underground Railroad and the period of slavery in the city of Detroit. That's where we started. And then, of course, I did tours at the museums. I did walking tours inside of the museum, the Detroit Historical Museum, the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Arts. So I did tours in those three venues. So that's how the company started, doing walking tours. Of course, since then, we cover civil rights, we cover Black Bottom Paradise Valley, we covered Midtown history, we cover a Boston Edison, we cover the 1967 rebellion, we cover all of the uprisings in the city of Detroit, we cover, of course, Motown history, and people like Aretha Franklin, we cover that history, other celebrities, their history in the city of Detroit. So we cover almost any kind of topic that deals particularly with African American history in the city of Detroit. And of course, we can tailor a tour for what people want. Some people want a little bit of civil rights, a little bit of Underground Railroad, a little bit of Motown, a little bit of Aretha. We can do that too. We mix them all up together. And so that's generally kind of what the family reunion tours are. They're like a hodgepodge, a little bit of each, not just all one thing. And so that's what I do, even to this day. But in that, people began to learn about this information, newspapers and journalists, and eventually I began to um, be become a consultant for a number of documentaries. And I'd say at this point, it's about 30 or 40 documentaries that I've been a part of. Not all of them have ever come to air, but a lot of them have. And so I'm in a number of documentaries. Of course, the most probably well-known documentary is the BMF documentary. And it's probably the most recent one I've been involved in, but I've been in a number of other ones for the History Channel, for PBS, um, for American Experience, for Smithsonian Channel. So I've been in a lot of documentaries, um, for TV One, BET. I've been on a number of documentaries that deal with Detroit's history. And as that occurred, there were feature film makers who are doing feature films that sometimes touch on Detroit's history. And so they began to approach me and have me to be a historical consultant for some of the feature films. And of course, No Sudden Move came out back in 2021. And that was probably the biggest feature film that I've been involved with, but it's not the only one, but it's the biggest one I've been involved with. And of course, Don Cheadle was the main character, and he played the main character in that film. Kurt Coins, the character he played, but it was a Steven Soderbergh film that aired on HBO Max, and so I served as the historical consultant for that film. But so yes, I those kinds of things happen eventually, and I do tours for institutions, colleges, universities, public schools. And so the U of M, the University of Michigan, had been one of the schools that have done a lot of tours with me. And they brought me in as a teacher. I teach the Detroit history class. It is called from the underground to Motown, a course on Detroit's Black history. So I've been teaching that class at the University of Michigan since 2021. And shortly after I began teaching there, the city of Detroit appointed me as the official historian for the city of Detroit.
I love it. So, and
Mhm.
this is the first. So they made that position specifically for you. So talk about how that obviously they did because you obviously have proven yourself as an authority and expert on it.
Mhm.
So, and again, I appreciate you representing for the city because I'm sure, well, not I'm sure, but did you experience some biases while doing some of those documentaries? Things that you had to open up producers' eyes to be
Yeah,
like, "You know what? The city,
right.
you had to represent for us in a way, probably some misnomers or biases or misconceptions that they had about the city."
Yeah, Detroit has been presented in a limited number of ways as deviant, dysfunctional, and dangerous.
Hmm,
That's the way that Detroit
mm,
is generally presented. And so there's this much deeper, much more richer history and culture in and around the city of Detroit that has to be brought out by people who know it. And many people come here who swoop down from Time Magazine or swoop down from HBO or swoop down from some other um, um, media source. They only know the stereotype of the city of Detroit, the stigma of the city of Detroit, and they don't know the true Detroit. And so, um, by helping them learn some of this history and this culture, it has opened the eyes not only of people who swoop in, but even people here in the city of Detroit, particularly in the region around the city of Detroit, many of them don't know this deeper
mm.
history, and they have negative connotations about their own city. And so I hope to, in fact, it's more important for me to do that to uncover some of our own biases about our own city than it is
Mm,
for me for the people who are coming from outside.
mhm.
People from outside, if I can get some of them to change their ideas, that's great, but the people who are here in the city of Detroit, it's more important for them to know the true Detroit and the true Detroit history because it's connected to them in their everyday lives.
I love that, and see, that's why I wanna shed a little light on the east side, west side thing, Jamon.
Mhm.
Okay, and I know you kinda neutral because you from Highland Park. But, shed a little light on that, how historically how that has contributed, because the theory my grandfather told me was how, w folks was moving to the west side, and that's where the Jews were living, the people of the Jewish community, and since they were black and moving on, they felt they were moving on up, and that kinda created that disparity because the east side was now thought to be lower class, and because we moving on up, the opposite of the Jeffersons, they were moving to the east side, but we were people were moving from the east side to the west side. And so just kind of talk about that white flight and just also how Detroit really is a segregated city in a
Yeah,
lot of way. It
yeah,
that
you
black
know,
them black bottom days you were telling me earlier, it was integrated with immigrants of all races. But
mm,
how do we kind of progress towards some of those disparities that we have going on?
yeah. So racism is at the root of a lot of what are still issues in the city of Detroit. Not just racism itself, but the history of Detroit's racism
Mm,
has
mm,
been a major part of the narrative, and really sometimes it's unspoken, but it is undergirding what's going on. So if you're talking about
mhm,
the East Side, West Side, well, Detroit's African American community begins on the East Side. Black Bottom is an East Side neighborhood. So let's be clear. It's a Lower East Side neighborhood. It is the neighborhood today. It would have been what we now call Lafayette Park, Elmwood Park, Bricktown, and Greektown. That would have been the historic neighborhood of Black Bottom. That's an East Side neighborhood. It's east of Woodward. So that would be an East Side, Lower East Side. We would call it much of that downtown today. But back in the day, a lot of what we call downtown was residential. It
mhm.
wasn't central business district. It was folks living and going to school and going to church. And so that would have been the East Side neighborhood. That's where black folks started in the city of Detroit. The East Side, particularly Black Bottom, is the center. It is the foundation for the black community. That's where black folks started. Now, of course, by the time we get to the 1930s, the, all the different groups of people who used to live in Black Bottom alongside black folks. Let's be clear. Black folks have been living in the area known as Black Bottom, the Lower East Side of the city of Detroit, since the 1700s. When the French arrived in 1701, they brought Africans, enslaved Africans with them. So when
Mm.
Antoine Lomé de la Morsuie de Cadillac arrives on July 4th, 1701, there are French slave owners who are coming. And so you get Jean Rivard, you get Noel Saint Aubin. We say Saint Aubin. today.
Oh Lord,
Alexander
I've been
Shin.
saying I've been saying St. Alban wrong.
You've been saying it right because in Detroit we don't pronounce them the French. We don't use the French pronunciations. That's why we call the city Detroit instead of Detroit.
Twa. Yes,
Right.
you
So
are
we don't
right.
use the French pronunciations, but I'm just telling you what his name was
Right,
at the
right.
time. Noel Saint Alban,
Alban.
Alexander Shin. We say Shane.
Oh my God.
Um,
It's probably what is
Louis
Gratiot?
Deville de Quinder.
Are we saying Gratiot
No,
right?
we're not. No, we're definitely not saying Gratiot. Gratiot. We're
Oh
definitely not
Lord.
saying Gratiot, but de Quinder. We say de Quinder.
Lord.
Um,
Okay. We
but these are slave owners in the city
okay.
of Detroit. So
Mm.
Antoine Beaubien, we say Beaubien. These are slave owners in the city
Lord,
of
all
Detroit.
these names.
So these Africans and indigenous people, Native Americans, are also enslaved by these
Mm.
Frenchmen. So they're enslaving people. So they've got slavery. But of course, you got slavery, you got the resistance, you got people fighting against slavery. So you got an underground railroad. So your early underground railroad sites in the city of Detroit are also in that area. So Second Baptist Church,
Right.
the home of William Lambert, the home of George D. Baptiste, the home of William Webb, um, the home of some of the other leaders of the Underground Railroad in the city of Detroit. They're all in that same neighborhood as well. Bethel AME Church, when it was founded, it was in Black Bottom. St. Matthew's Episcopal Church was on the corner of St. Antoine and Congress. That would have been Black Bottom. So this is this Lower East Side neighborhood. This is where Black folks live, but they don't live there alone. Even when slavery is over in the city of Detroit, and they're still people helping others from other states escape from slavery. And we have an underground railroad in the city of Detroit. Even when that's happening, there are Irish immigrants who move to the area.
Mm.
German immigrants begin to move to the area. And
Okay.
eventually, German immigrants will be the majority in that neighborhood. About a fourth of those German immigrants are Jewish. So you got Jewish folks there. You got Polish immigrants begin coming. You have Syrian immigrants coming, and some of those Syrians would be what we would call Arab today. So your
Mm.
first Arab immigrants before Dearborn, they live in Black Bottom. And of course, Greek and Italian immigrants will come at the end of the 1800s, which is how you get a Greek town. And
Mhm.
so this is these immigrants, and they are the majority. They're European immigrants. They're being discriminated against. They are poor in most cases. They open small shops. They're not wealthy in most cases. They open up a business strip on Hastings. This is what, and they're living right alongside Black folks who are doing some of the same things they're doing. And they can't get jobs in many places because people, and I'm putting this in quotes, I'm doing the quotes, making my air quotes, white Native American natives to the United States. And I'm putting quotes. They're not natives. They're descendants of immigrants too.
Mhm.
But they see themselves as Americans and they see these
Mhm.
other people as foreigners. They see
Mhm.
the Irish as foreigners, the Germans as foreigners, the Polish as
Mhm.
foreigners. And so they're discriminating against them. But as those Polish and Irish and German immigrants and Greek immigrants and Italian immigrants have children and grandchildren, they're not from Italy. They're born here in America. They don't
Mm.
speak with an Italian accent or German accent. They're born in America. Not only that, they have pretty good jobs because the auto industry has picked up. Before that, the tobacco and cigar industry was big in the city of Detroit, and the building of railroad cars was big in the city of Detroit. Building of iron stoves was big in the city of Detroit. So they're making much better money than their grandparents who came from the old
Mm.
country. So they don't speak with an accent. They're born in America, and they
Making
make
my money
pretty good
working.
money. They're white. They have evolved to become white
Mhm.
Americans. So they can do what their grandparents couldn't do. And so they can move out of Black Bottom.
Yeah, okay. So they can
But
move you up.
they can,
Well,
so now they
mhm.
housing discrimination, they're being able to transcend that. But Black folks,
Right, because they didn't have to worry about that red line
right?
and all of that
Black
yeah.
folks who are coming from the South now in large numbers during the Great Migration after 1910, particularly after Henry Ford offers $5 a day to all workers in 1914. African Americans are coming from the South in large numbers, but they're running into housing discrimination, despite the fact that they speak English, despite the fact that they
Mhm.
have good jobs.
Yep.
They can't move wherever they want to.
Nope.
So, one of the ways that Black people do get out of the Black Bottom area, one of the ways is they follow Jewish migration. So as
Mhm.
Jewish people begin to move out of Black Bottom into north of Black Bottom, the Paradise Valley area, Black people are able to move into the Paradise Valley area and eventually take it over and become the Black business strip. As Jewish folks move to the North End, African
Mm,
Americans begin to be able to move to the north end.
mm,
As Jewish people move to the 12th Dexter Linwood neighborhood, African Americans are able to move to the 12th Dexter Linwood neighborhood, and eventually Jewish people will leave the city of Detroit outright, Southfield, Oak Park at first,
mhm,
and African Americans will become the majority in Southfield and Oak Park. Those would be two suburbs that would have a predominantly, two middle class suburbs that would have a predominantly African American population. African American migration follows Jewish migration in and around the city of Detroit. So they're moving
mm,
out of Black Bottom. Black Bottom, of course, had been the discriminated neighborhood, the neighborhood that African Americans were forced into, that they were cordoned, they were overcrowded in because of housing discrimination. So had become run down. Being able to move out of that neighborhood on your own, I don't mean when it was destroyed and you were forced out, but being able to move out of that area on your own did give some African Americans a feeling that they had accomplished something
mhm.
by being able to move out of Black
And
Bottom.
thus passing that
And
down
so
to the
as that
generations
as
like,
that
"Oh, we
goes
better because we
down,
done moved out."
yeah, so there is some of that. And of course, on the flip side of that, there's some resentment for people who stayed to the people who left. So
Mhm.
you have it's not a one-way tension. It was a two-way tension. But I would argue that a lot of that tension compared to the time that I was growing up, and definitely compared to the time that my mother and father was growing up, is going away. That east side, west side tension is much less today than it
Oh, you
was.
think so? Because
Yeah,
people still be talking
they
crazy
still
too.
talk,
But
but
I wanna go back to what
it's
you said
more
about
joking
following.
now than it
Yeah.
was back then.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
back
Yeah,
then
you're
it was
right.
for real, for real.
Okay.
Now it's more teasing. It's
Okay.
more of
I
a
get it.
it's
Yeah,
more of a
yeah. Because
teasing.
yeah.
Hey, you from that east side. That's why
Yeah, because
y'all
I do
don't.
take it personal.
Yeah.
I do get on. I will come for people who talk about mess about the East Side.
Right, right.
But I love how you pointed out how Black migration mimicked the Jewish migration,
That's right.
because I remember there was a time when mostly it was Jewish people staying in West Bloomfield, and now I have a
Mhm.
lot of Black friends who stay in West
That's
Bloomfield.
right.
So that really, I love
Yeah, because
how we have um, transcended those redlining barriers that held us back.
yes. So one of the things is Jewish people were discriminated against in housing as well. Not to the degree that African Americans were, but they would be in most cases, the last group of what people would call white folks who would be able to move into a neighborhood.
Right.
So
Okay.
by the time they got into a neighborhood, all of the other white ethnic groups have been into that neighborhood and been out. And
Mm,
so who's coming after Jewish folks? It's nobody, it's no other white groups left.
pretty
The
much.
only so if they're gonna sell a rent, who are they gonna sell the rent to? It's only one group left,
Mhm.
and that's us. And so African Americans would be the group that would come to the areas where Jewish people had just left, because Jewish people, in most cases, face the highest level of discrimination among white groups.
Right.
Among
Okay.
white groups, they face the most discrimination. So they'd be the last white folks to get into a neighborhood. After them, there are no other white folks coming. So that's us.
Mm.
We would end up in
What
those
what is
neighborhoods.
your thoughts on, and I love thank you to everyone watching. Shout out to Miss Marguerite Adams Gray, Charles McKay. Hey Gigi, my auntie Claudette. Shout out to everyone watching. What are your thoughts on changing the landmark names? Because to me, Coleman and Young is always the city county building.
Mhm.
Um, what is it now? Huntington Place. That's always gonna be Cobo Hall to me. I don't. This is my thing. Like
Yeah.
that's just like saying let's change the name of Belle to me.
Mhm.
Like the GM building is always gonna be the Renaissance building. Which, by the way, GM building used to be on what used to be Cat is now
Mhm.
Cadillac
Mhm.
Place.
Mhm.
So, my thing is, I don't know. It's so many traditions that have been formed in these buildings. To me, I don't know if changing the name really does anything. What do you think about that?
So I'm in most cases I'm with these changes. So when we come, let's start with Belle Isle. So Belle Isle wasn't always Belle Isle. So let's start there. It
Okay.
was Wannabeezy. That was what it was. It was White Swan Island. That's what the Ottawa named it. It was their land first, and they named it after the animals who inhabited the island, white swans. So they named it White Swan Island. When the French came, Louis de Ville de Quinder names it Ile Cochon, which is Hog Island. He named it that because he's storing, along with the other Frenchmen and French farmers, they're storing their pigs on the island. So the island becomes a farm and a storehouse for French landowners,
Mm,
wealthy French landowners, and many of whom were also slave owners.
mm.
So the Campbell family, Joseph Campbell, slave owner, John R. Williams, he's
So that's
also
what
a
I'm saying.
slave.
You would have to change the whole
Right.
city then, Jamon.
So,
This is my thing.
so they
It's
named
so
it.
entrenched in the city. Would you change the street too? I mean, like,
So they named it First, it was Ileo Couchon. So it was Wannabeezy by Native Americans, then Ileo Couchon by the French, and then the Campbell family named it Belle Isle in honor of Isabel Cass, because Lewis Cass and the Campbell family, those families had intermarried. Lewis
Mm.
Cass was the second territorial governor of Michigan. They intermarried.
Mm.
That's how it becomes Belle Isle.
Okay.
So Belle Isle is the third name of the island. So
Okay.
it's been changed, and and now we all know it by that name, like that's
Listen,
been
or the
always the
Rock.
name,
I mean, it's the Rock. Really,
right?
it is the
So,
Rock.
so I'm good with the name changes. I'm good with Shane Park not being the Aretha Franklin Amphitheater now. I'm good with that because Alexander Shin was a slave owner. I'm
That
happy with
doesn't
it
really
being named.
change it though. It
I'm
doesn't change the traditions that were made there. That's my
no, it
thing.
don't change
Him
that.
being racist doesn't change the traditions that
Oh
we
no, no,
that
no.
we
But honoring when you name a building after a person, what you're doing is you're honoring that person. So it's not just about the things that happen there. That those things that happen there are great, whether it's Shane Park, whether it's Aretha Franklin, whether it's don't have no name. Those
okay.
things that happen there are still great. But when you are giving honor to a particular person, ought we be giving honor to the Queen of Soul who grew up in the city of Detroit? We ain't had no amphitheater named after her. Why wouldn't that be named after her? So I think that was a great move. Naming the city county building after the first African American mayor in the city of Detroit, Coleman Young, I think was great because had it not been, I'm gonna be clear about this, had that city county building not been named after the Coleman A. Young Municipal Center, it would have been named sometime later after some other mayor of the city of Detroit.
Okay.
So what we gonna do? Pick Coleman Young or pick
No.
some later
Yeah,
mayor?
because it probably wouldn't have
Yeah,
Kilpatrick probably wouldn't have that
right,
wouldn't have went too well. That
right.
probably
So it would
or
have
even
got at some
Archer.
point.
That
At some point, you not a city hall is going to get named after somebody. So
okay.
it started as city county building, but at some point it was going to get named after somebody. I am happy that it get named after the first African American mayor of Detroit, the longest serving mayor of the city of Detroit, Coleman Alexander Young. So I'm happy for that. Cobo, of course, we all know, or we should all know, that Albert Cobo was a segregationist. He runs for mayor. He wins 3 elections. He dies in office. He is the mayor that is behind the destruction of Black Bottom and
Mm.
largely behind the destruction of Hastings Street and Paradise Valley. The plans for that begin while he's the mayor. They don't actually begin destroying it till after he's passed away. But the plans for it to be destroyed is under his mayoralty. And so Cobo is behind that. He wasn't, it's not a hidden thing. It's just that people have forgotten, but it wasn't a hidden thing of how he felt about the African American community while he was mayor. So it should have been renamed, but I of course feel like it should have been renamed outside of people paying for some company coming in
And
paying for the
see, that's
rights.
my thing.
And
TCF and now Huntington Place. So
right,
what is it? This just pretty much
yeah,
going to the highest bidder. That's my thing. Because if you're
yeah.
really trying to change the name, make it have some significant connotation now. If
See,
that's really the goal,
yeah,
that's my thing.
I agree with that.
That's my
And that's
thing.
been a Detroit problem for a long
Okay,
time.
make it matter.
When Antoine Lomé de la Motte Stewart de Cadillac comes to the city of Detroit, he builds Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit, basically where Hart Plaza is, where Cobo is, running all the way up to what is now 4th Street. So that's why it's called 4th Street, because it was the border of the fort. So he builds this fort. He names it Pontchartrain after the French nobleman who gave him the money and funded his whole
Mm.
expedition. That started the tradition in the city of Detroit where we name stuff after the people who pay for it. If
Yeah.
you pay for it, you can get your name on it. So we have a
That's
Comerica Park.
capitalism.
We have a Comerica Park. We have a Ford Field. We got the Q short for Quicken Loans.
Mm-hmm.
We got the TCF Center. We
Right.
got all of these
Right.
because these wealthy people the Mike Ilitch School of Business at Wayne
Yep.
State University. This is what I call conspicuous compassion. And so there's this thing that we learn in sociology called conspicuous consumption. And the conspicuous consumption basically states that people wear things that are conspicuous, like a polo shirt with the man on the horse,
Mm-hmm.
or Calvin Klein underwear, and they let their pants hang down a little so you can see that they got Calvin Kleins on. Conspicuous consumption is the idea that you want people to see how much money you're spending on
Yes.
stuff.
Right.
And of course, poor people and working class people do it at a higher level than anybody else, but everybody does it. So rich people do it. They buy extravagant things that other rich people notice. Middle
Mhm.
class folks do it. They get a nice refrigerator or a washer and
Mhm.
dryer
Child.
or whatever, a lawnmower that starts by itself. That's middle class folks do. And then of course, poor people and working class people buy designer clothes. And if they get
Mhm.
some money, like they was born poor and became rich because they was a rapper or a football player, then they wear jewelry and gold and all of that. And then people talk about them. It's like, look at that, spend all that money on that. Well, everybody practices conspicuous consumption. Of course, poor people practice it at a higher level because they don't have as much money and they really trying to show that they're not poor. That's what they're
Mm.
trying to do.
Mm. The irony.
The conspicuous consumption. But conspicuous compassion can only be practiced by one group of people, and that's the rich. So poor people don't do that. And that's give money to some institution so that you can have your name on
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
institution. And you want your name to last in infinity because you gave that money. And so that we have that in
Imma
the city
see.
of Detroit.
I don't think I'll ever think of it as Huntington Place.
Yeah. So
But okay,
yeah,
we you
I,
they coulda made it Joe Louis.
I would have
They
loved
coulda
it. I would have
transferred that
loved if they had
over.
done that.
Since y'all tore down Joe Louis,
I would
that would have been my
love if they
vote. Why
had done
can't we
that
make this the Joe Louis Expo Center?
because no bank is gonna pay for
Mhm.
the naming rights to name it after something
Mhm.
else. This is
Mhm.
basically a big ad campaign for them
Mhm.
is by having their name on it. I wish it had not gone to the highest bidder. I wish it
Yeah.
had. I wish that the the board for Kobo had just decided to name it in honor of somebody who was honorable in the city of Detroit,
Yeah,
like Joe
absolutely.
Louis or
Yeah,
someone else. It doesn't matter.
absolutely.
I wish that had happened, but
Yeah,
money talks, and
exactly.
that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some things you've learned about yourself in doing this, Jamon? What is some things that the tour is like going around to the different landmarks and just is this some things that have occurred to you at times that you've learned about yourself or just have surprised you? Like, what has it been like for you? Because I know that has got to just be like astounding when you come across. Like, do you feel like you be pulling just discovering a gold nugget
All the
sometimes when
time.
you're
All the
like,
time.
dang,
Yeah,
okay.
all the time. I'm always learning. I'm always learning more than I knew before. Sometimes I'm learning it just in the work and going to the places and in archives and in books and research. Sometimes I learn it that way. Sometimes I learn it because people go on my tours and they have information. So they'll say, "Hey, I grew up on this block and this and such happened here." And so I learn a new thing. Or people say, "I'm the great grandson of so and so," and they give me more information about that person or that event than I had before. So I'm always learning new things. But one thing that is probably I learned this early in this business, in this tour business, is that all Detroit's history is connected. So that's what I learned. That there is no way of separating history from something else. So
Mm,
I can call it the Underground Railroad tour and do a tour on the Underground Railroad. But the reality, if you take that tour, you will learn how the Underground Railroad is so connected to what we call the civil rights movement. And that you could argue that there is no real separation between the two. The Underground Railroad is just the early part of the civil rights movement.
mm.
The same people or the same families, the same institutions, the same churches, the same neighborhoods, the same institutions are involved in both. So you learn that information. For instance, William Lambert, one of the leaders of the Underground Railroad in the city of Detroit, he's a station master. He's hiding people in his house. He's a conductor. He's taking people from one place to another, even over to Canada to get free. He's married to Julia Willoughby Lambert, who is also an Underground Railroad leader. So they're both working, they're partners. They have a child, Benjamin Willoughby Lambert. So Julia Lambert and her husband, William Lambert, have a child named Benjamin Willoughby Lambert. Benjamin Willoughby Lambert is one of the founders of the Detroit branch of the NAACP. His parents are
Mm.
Underground Railroad leaders. He's a civil rights leader. One family, one generation.
So he
It's,
was a white man.
these are all black folks.
Oh, these
These
all
are all
black folks.
black folks.
Okay,
These
I'm
are all
like, wait a
black
minute
folks.
now. Hold on.
These are all
Okay,
black folks. Yep.
all
That's
black.
another thing that's very important.
Okay.
Whenever you're talking about civil rights history in the city of Detroit, Underground Railroad history in the city of Detroit, you're talking primarily about black people.
Okay.
What we've been taught, and what I was taught as a young person, was that the Underground Railroad were white saviors,
Yes. Thank you for clearing it. Thank you.
helping
Okay.
black people
That's
escape
why I
from
was like, were they
slavery.
white or were they black? That's why I had
Yep.
to make the
That's what I
distinction.
learned
Thank you.
growing
Okay.
up. Growing up, I learned that particularly Quakers, they save black people
Right.
from
They were
slavery.
the poster
They
child
were
for
the
us.
but in
In
reality,
reality,
when
we
you
were the
learn
ones.
about
Okay.
The Underground Railroad was organized, led, and the majority of the people involved in it were black people. So
Mm.
now when we look at Harriet Tubman is not the exception. That's the way the Underground Railroad really works. It's black people are leaders who have white allies,
Mm.
white folks who are system, but black folks are at the leadership of it. In Detroit, that's even much more the case. And so William Lambert and his wife Julia, they're both black folks. You can Google their pictures and actually see their photographs. So they lived long enough to be photographed, so you can see their photos. And they had a son, Benjamin Willoughby Lambert. He's the one of the founders of the Detroit branch of the NAACP. The parents are Underground Railroad leaders. Child is an NAACP founder, civil rights leader. Same family, one. So you can't separate the history. And as you get black folks who become the majority in Black Bottom and create their business district known as Paradise Valley, this business strip with 350 black-owned businesses by the 1930s, starting out in the area that we now know is Comerica Park, Ford Field, 36th District Court. That was the original area of Paradise Valley, and of course
Mm.
the freeway is there, 75, but that would have been Hastings Street. That area, you will have 350 black-owned businesses by the 1930s in that neighborhood.
Mm.
A lot of them, these businesses are restaurants, stores, hotels, jazz clubs, bars, nightclubs, performance venues. So you get this music center, particularly jazz, big band. Those jazz musicians, those big band musicians, those will be the teachers of the Funk Brothers, who will be the main
Mm.
musicians for Motown.
Motown.
So you don't get a Motown without Paradise Valley. You don't get a Paradise Valley without
Mm.
Black Bottom. You don't get a Black Bottom with the deep black history in it without the Underground Railroad. All of these histories are connected. And of course, we know the first African American mayor of the city of Detroit, he grew up in Black Bottom, Coleman Young. All of this history is connected. You can't separate the history. I can call it the Motown tour, but no doubt Black Bottom's gonna come up. I can call it the Black Bottom tour, but no doubt Paradise Valley is gonna come up. I can call it the Paradise Valley tour, but no doubt the Underground Railroad is gonna come up. It's no way to separate all of these histories. They're all connected. That is an important part of talking about the city of Detroit.
I love that. I love that. All of it's interconnected. So,
Hmm.
what let's talk about now and shift a little bit
Okay.
on kind of in a way, I don't know if I should describe it as a like a renaissance we've
Hmm.
had
Hmm.
in the last 10 to 15
Yeah,
years
yeah.
with gentrification and just more highlights on black businesses, how
Yeah.
the resurgence of that around the city and so forth in the midst of
Hmm.
gentrification
Hmm.
is kind of crazy because it's been gentrification, but
Right.
it's also been black businesses
Hmm.
increasing as well. The filmmaking industry is booming.
Yep.
Talk about that as you being someone from Detroit and also as a historian, like, because it's like kind of two sides of the coin. You're
Yeah,
in it because you a resident,
that's right.
but also you're kind of have the objective view because as a historian, you're
Yeah,
doing some research.
yeah.
So talk about that this I guess evolution of Detroit from crack Detroit in the 80s to now in the 2020s where we're doing, all these areas because I remember when Midtown was New Center
Yeah,
area.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So talk about the evolution, what you think about, what's happening in Detroit now.
So it's a couple of things that need to be discussed. And of course, I'm a historian, so I always have to talk about all of these things in historical context. It's hard for me.
Come on, we got about 12 minutes,
Yep.
but yep, that sounds like
Yep.
I gotta
So
get his opinion on Detroit
all right.
now, from then to now.
So
Like,
let's talk
yeah.
about that. So there's never been a time when black folks in the city of Detroit has not had to deal with all of these problematic trends and still progressed under these problematic trends. So during the period of Paradise Valley, when African Americans owned 350 black businesses in this small little area in the Lower East Side of the city of Detroit, this is a time of high level of Jim Crow, high level of segregation,
Mm,
high level of racism.
mm,
This is a time when there's businesses that won't hire black people. Black people are the last to be hired, the first to be fired. These are
mm,
places. This is a time period when black folks try to go and stay at certain hotels. They can't stay there. They try to go to a certain kind of bar or club. They won't be allowed in. The YMCA will not let black folks join the YMCA, the downtown YMCA. Black people have to start their own YMCA, the St. Antoine YMCA in
Mm.
Paradise Valley. Black women can't join the downtown YWCA, have to start their own YWCA, the Lucy Thurman YWCA in Paradise Valley. This is a high time, but at this time, Black people say, okay, one of their responses to the segregation, one of the responses, not the only one, but one of them is to start their own, create their own institutions, create their own businesses, and thrive that way. So now we live in a time in the last 10 years or so, probably a little closer to 15 to 20 now, where downtown and midtown has been this resurgence. When I was growing up, a lot of those businesses were blighted buildings or they were
Mhm.
abandoned.
Mhm.
And now you go down to these areas and there's clubs, restaurants, stores, shops, all open,
Mhm.
bustling, whole bunch of foot
Right.
traffic going on. And you have to, on one level, be, man, this is really great that it is all this stuff
Mhm.
happening in the city of Detroit. But you know, at the same time, the African Americans have been blocked out of some of this development,
Mhm.
partly because Black Bottom and Paradise Valley were destroyed by federal, state, and local policies. So the city policies, federal government policies, and state policies destroyed this African American residential neighborhood, this African American business district, and the main strip that ran through both, Hastings Street. So the government came in and destroyed what Black progress. Let's make that clear. It wasn't the Ku Klux Klan who came in and ran Black folks out of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. It was the federal government
But
funding the
wasn't it
city.
actually burned down though?
No, no,
It
they
wasn't burned down.
no, it
Okay, so
wasn't.
it didn't something similar to Tulsa didn't happen?
No, that's not what happened.
Okay. All
The
right.
city under Mayor Cobo demolished Black Bottom with funding from the federal
Oh,
government, the
okay.
National Housing Act of
Wow.
1949,
Okay.
demolished it and forced all the residents out.
Okay.
So that's what happened. Then the federal government funded the building of a freeway and
375.
they chose to build it on Hastings Street. The city chose to build that freeway down Hastings Street, which was the main business strip for Paradise Valley. So that is what happened to black folks. It wasn't no race riot, Ku Klux Klan. Detroit has had race riots. And I'm not saying they haven't, but that ain't what destroyed Black Bottom in Paradise
Okay.
Valley. So
Okay.
that's the first thing.
Okay.
So you get this thing that happened. Now let's say that didn't happen. Let's say the federal government didn't fund the destruction of Black Bottom and city policy didn't destroy Black Bottom in Paradise Valley and Hastings Street. Let's say that didn't happen. And you had 350 Black owned businesses in the 1920s and 30s. What would that look like in the 100 years later? If you had 350 Black businesses back in the heat of racism time, what would it look like 100 years later? You would have six, seven, 800 Black owned
Right.
businesses.
Right.
They wouldn't be billionaires, maybe not all of them, maybe a couple of them would be, but you'd have a bunch of millionaires.
Mm.
Instead of downtown development being really dominated by 2 or 3 billionaires,
Right.
it'd be 30 or 40
Right.
Black
Right.
multimillionaires. It
Right.
still would be developed. Now let's say something else. A lot of the development that you see in downtown and midtown being done by 2 or 3 billionaires and other developers, not just those 2 or 3 billionaires, but other developers, is being funded by taxpayer money. So the Ilitch family, of course, Dan Gilbert is the wealthiest Michigander. A lot of their development is not, they're not spending their own money, they're spending our money. So state taxpayer funds are being distributed so that they can build bigger and more.
Mm.
About half of what it costs to build the LCA, the Little Caesars Arena, came from taxpayers. Half of
Mm.
that money, about $400 million of it, came from taxpayer money. So now
Mm. That don't
let's
sound right. That don't sound
now let's
fair.
say
That don't
let's
sound
billionaires getting taxpayer money. That's right. That's what happens in the
ooh.
city of Detroit.
Mm.
Now let's say those Black business owners in Paradise Valley, not only they weren't run out by urban renewal in the building of a freeway. Let's say that not only were they not run out from that, that they got those taxpayer $400 million in taxpayer funds to expand their businesses. Now, what would downtown in it would still be developed. We still have businesses and shops and restaurants. It just would look different. The owners would look different.
Yep.
The kind of businesses would look different. It would be more diverse than what it is now.
Mm.
So let's be clear about that. But like I said, Black folks thrived. They made themselves thrive, even during this time of intense discrimination, during the Jim Crow era in the 1920s and 30s, when Black people couldn't get certain kind of jobs, they couldn't live wherever they wanted to, they couldn't go and be patrons at certain kinds of businesses. Now we got gentrification, of course, we got billionaires getting taxpayer funds for their development ideas, and African Americans being locked out of that. And so we still see Black folks persevering in this
Yep,
environment,
absolutely.
building business strips, particularly, of course, the most well-known business strip is the Avenue of Fashion. That business strip, which is largely African American owned, they are persevering in a climate that has not been made for them. It has not been made comfortable for them. There have
Mhm.
to be, even though they're business folks, they got to be civil rights activists
Yeah,
to run a business.
yeah.
You know, you can't just be good at at being a baker. You just can't be good at making clothes. You also got to get on the battleground and fight for the same kinds of resources that other folks get just from showing up
Yeah.
to the party. They just show up and they get all the resources. You got to fight for those things. And that's what black folks have been doing in the city of Detroit. That's historically what black folks have been doing in the city
Mhm.
of Detroit, and they're still doing it to this day.
Absolutely. And I do appreciate how we have, like I said, it seems like it's been a resurgence. And I have to
Mhm.
say shout out to my best friend Gigi, who in a way predicted this back in the early 2000s. She was like, just wait, the next 10 to 15 years, Detroit is going to be like back on the map.
Mhm.
And we are getting there, but it's still, I wish more of that progress was in the inner city.
That's true.
But I like to see the businesses that are on 6 Mile in Wyoming, the
Mhm.
businesses that are, you know,
Mhm.
on Dexter,
Mhm.
on Joy Road. I like to see them on Mac Avenue.
Mhm.
I loved, and by the way, you were over in my old hood on Mac and Van Dyke when you were
Mhm.
did the story. Shout out to Chris Walker on
Okay.
food
Oh,
deserts
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yep, yep.
around the city.
That's right.
So I just wish that more of this progression, this
Yeah.
avenue of fashion type situations were more in
Yeah.
the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I do. I agree,
Because it
and
seems like a lot of that stuff is still kinda on the outskirts
yeah,
because
it's uneven.
realistically, that's about 8 Mile and,
Yeah, it's
that's
an
so
uneven distribution.
yeah.
So it's an uneven development. We got areas in the city of Detroit that are booming
Right,
and
and then
blowing
others
up,
that are
and then
just
others that
like
are almost gone.
tumbleweeds.
And
Right,
there's streets that have no house left on it.
right,
So we would
yeah,
like to see this much more evenly distributed throughout the city. This
yeah,
development, this housing development, this business development, these institutions, schools being renewed, and
right.
churches being built. We would like to see that happening much more throughout the city of Detroit, not just in these particular strips of the city of Detroit. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's a challenge, and of course, that's a challenge that has been a challenge for the city of Detroit for decades.
No, no, yeah. So I wish we could keep going, Jamon, but
I
we've only got
understand.
an hour.
That's right.
And this is just part one actually,
Okay.
because we can't encompass
No. Yeah, it's too
everything.
much. It's too
But I
much.
know it's been so informative and I love like I said when you posted the other day how you get a lot of your information from actual archives. You actually go to books. You actually go to the Detroit Public Library.
Mhm.
What are some other places that you go to get those archives?
Yeah, so archival research is the foundation of doing historical research. So for Detroit, most historians would tell you the Burton Library, the Burton Archives, which are housed inside of the main branch of the Detroit Public Library on
Okay.
Woodward. That's step one. The Detroit Historical Museum also has archives, so you would go to their archives. The
And
Walter
you just
P.
need to be a citizen. You can just come in and ask, like, can I look this up
So
or
it's a
what?
way that you have to
Okay.
request these things, but yes,
Okay.
at some point, as a citizen, you can get access to those archives. Although you can't walk out the door, you can go in and look at some of that research.
Okay.
A lot of it is online as well. So they put a lot of their research online, so it is a way to get it that way as well. The Walter P. Reuther archives at Wayne State
Mm,
University. So that's like a little corner. They're all right next to each other.
okay,
Burton,
good.
Walter P. Reuther, Detroit Historical Museum. That little corner is the archival corner for historians in the city of Detroit, particularly historians who do what I do. The Azalea Hackley collections also at the main branch of Detroit Public Library, another place to do a lot of research. The Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History also has archives. And so that would be another place you can do a lot of research. And then, of course, sometimes you got to go to the universities. You got to go to Michigan State University. You got to go to U of M, the Benton uh, um, library at, at U of M. You got to go to these other places and do more research. And of course, even you might have to go to the Library of Congress or get some of their files and some of their information as well. But you start right here in the city of Detroit. That's more you find much more information than you can find in any books. But books are the next level. So you go to
Okay, sure.
books and you read books about the city of Detroit. Detroit Almanac is very important. I think everybody should have that. The Detroit Almanac by Peter Gavrilovich and Bill McGraw. um, Black Detroit by Herb Boyd, all of the works of Ken Coleman on this day in African American history in Detroit. That's a very important book. I mean, there's many others. The Fluid Frontier about the Underground Railroad in the city of Detroit. That's another very important book that people ought to have about the city of Detroit. And there's many others. I can't name them all, but
Yeah.
these are these will give you a good start in Detroit history as well in the books. And once you move from the books, you would go if you're watching films, documentaries. Start with documentaries. Don't start with the feature films like Detroit and
No,
BMF
no.
and um, what's the other movies about the city, feature films about the city of Detroit. But don't start with those. Not that they're bad. The Temptations, they're not bad, but start with the documentaries about the
To
city
get
of
more
Detroit
accurate,
because you
yeah.
can get more accurate information and you get somewhere where you can begin doing some more research on your own. When you see that historian on that documentary talking, many cases that historian has written some stuff about Detroit. Now you can go research that historian and see what he's written or she's written about the city of Detroit and read those writings and then look at the footnotes that are in those writings and find more information about the city of Detroit. That'll take you down a rabbit hole that will give you a lot of information, much more than you can get from a feature film. But feature films aren't bad.
He's
They're a
like,
good introduction to the
okay.
city of Detroit's history. So if you watch some feature film, BMF or Detroit, which was about the raid at the Algiers
Mhm.
Motel, if you watch any of these feature film or even the movie that I was historical consultant of, No Sudden Move, you watch those movies, they're a good introduction to a part of Detroit's history. But if don't ever let that be the be all end all of what you learned about the city of Detroit.
I love it. Well, thank you, Jamon. I really appreciate you. Please tell people where they can find you.
Okay. Yes, you can find me.
And you have an event coming up.
Yep, yep. You can find me on Facebook. Black Scroll Network History and Tours is the Facebook page, but I'm also there, Jamon Jordan, on Facebook. And you can find my events on eventbrite.com/Black Scroll. And I'm going to be discussing the history of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. So, a much more in depth discussion about that neighborhood next week on Thursday at 7 p.m. at the Huntington Woods Public Library. It's free and open to the public.
I love it. And just one last thing, I wanted to end on a fun note.
Hmm.
Since hip hop is 50 years
That's
old
right.
and we both from the same generation, kind of sort of. I mean, I know
Yeah.
you're a little older than
Yep,
me,
yep, a
but
little bit.
I've seen a lot of the 80s and 90s
Yeah,
lyrics you be putting up there. I'm
that's
like,
right.
Jamon is speaking to me. So, right quick, Jamon,
Right.
who was your favorite hip hop artist?
Rakim. Rakim is my
I
favorite
love it. The
rapper. Yeah.
God.
Yeah, he is my favorite
The
rapper.
God.
Yep. No,
Okay.
no, no, no questions asked. But
The
there's a
God
lot of other
MC.
folks that are right there, right next to him. Like I grew up a LL Cool J fan, Run DMC fan. So they right there, right in there, right there next to him.
I
So
love
yeah,
it. I love it. Yeah, I can't argue with the God though.
you're right.
He's definitely in my top 5.
That's good.
I don't know if I could ever say who my most favorite is
Yeah,
or my
it's
greatest
always
because it
difficult.
depends on
It
the
depends. Yeah,
mood and
sometimes that's right. I feel that. I
yeah, it'd
feel
be
that.
hard to like. I hate when
I
people
feel
like the
that.
greatest one. I'm like,
I
oh,
have
it
to
just
admit that
depends.
I am definitely 80s bias. I have an
Yes, I
80s
mean
bias,
into
that's for
80s and
sure.
90s. That's why I
Yep,
said,
yep.
and to kind of backtrack, you're right. The 80s, late 80s is really when the conscious,
Yeah,
and that's what I was telling my daughter. It's not that the music was better. It's just that we had more of a variety.
that's true.
You had your conscious, you had your bubblegum, you had
Mhm,
your underground, you
mhm,
had your gangster rap. Like it was
mhm.
just so many levels to it.
That's
So
true, that's true.
again, I thank you, Jamon.
Thank you, thank
Y'all
you so
make sure
much.
y'all follow Jamon. Make sure we book some of these tours.
Yep.
Really appreciate it. And I'm gonna have to go on a tour. I think my mom and them will probably love that.
Oh, yeah, that would be
We need
great.
to go on a tour. So, but thank you everyone for tuning in to Rocky's Reality. Next week we got 2 shows. So next week we are back with Rashida the Glam Doctor. So see you all soon. Thanks for watching.
Alright, thank you.
Thank you, Jamon. Take care. All right.